architect or whatever it is. But we really have to look at where are the real meaningful deployments where a consumer is getting benefit, potentially health is a great example, or a business is getting benefit, for example, a retailer really being able to analyse the effect of their marketing campaigns in terms of the human reaction to that. So I think those de facto deployments will start to drive meaningful momentum, and from that meaningful momentum will come some standardisation. I think the danger for the industry is that we over-focus on the standardisations before we get the practical deployments, and actually those de facto standards can be as useful as hard standards as you're forming an industry.
Well, maybe a little bit to provocate you, if there is not interoperability between various applications, are we talking, that's by the way the same thing with the silo concept that you mentioned, are we talking about Internet of Things, or are we talking about infrastructure to a lot of applications? Really, is there a market for Internet of Things? Because if this is separate applications, then probably each one of them has different supply chain, different ecosystem, different service providers. So aren't we creating an imaginary thing? If we don't have standards, I think we are going that way.
It's provocative, yes.
Yeah, so I'll start, and then you can respond in a provocative way. I agree. I think we have to look for connectivity in all of these areas. I do believe as we start to see the benefits of the linkages of these silos. For example, I met with a hospital director last week in Italy, and he's just got a wonderful pilot, which is he's linked a vending machine solution to the health of what's being vended, and he's adding that to his patient care process for consumers in the hospital. And you look at that and you think, wow, that's so obvious. Why isn't everyone thinking about having smart vending in a hospital that helps create the benefit of the well-being of the patient? So that's a really obvious, when you see that, that's obvious. And then I think the APIs to pull that together can be rapidly defined, but you have to see the linkages. So I think it's about the business models that drive this benefit that will lead the standards, not the other way around.
Well, one comment that I can add here is, from my experience, platforms, in many cases, successful platforms, start from one really successful vertical solution, and then platforms get expanded, and other solutions are joining maybe a successful base. It doesn't always happen that way, but from my experience, in most cases it happens that way. So platforms are not planned as platforms. In many cases, they succeed and then they become platforms. So your question, who knows? I know that Nest's strategy was to create one application with a thermostat which will serve as a hub in the home for other devices. They already are talking about smoke detectors, other in-home additions to their IoT strategy. And at the end of the day, if there will be a different platform started by GM for connected car, that's okay, because it will take a long time before you need to really merge the two worlds. So that's my 2 cents.
So my point of view is that there are already companies working to create, basically protocols which will drive common connectivity between different type of devices coming in, like all join, initiative, and the verticals are going to be built on top of that. So when you're talking to the low-level device, you're talking at the level of Zigbee, Z-Wave, SNMP, TCP, UDP, whatever might it be, but that acquisition of information is not vertical agnostic at that point. So the systems which are coming in, which are creating maybe vertical solution for health or drive experience, but at the lowest level, they're still working to capture information from various IoT ecosystem devices and that's where the first aggregation will happen.
I think that the answer to your question is no. And
That was a long one.
yeah, I mean, this was the long one. Now the short version is that there is value in some IoT systems, okay? And I agree with Iran. I mean, you don't have to look at a connected car with a medical device in the hospital to be on the same platform and to draw the big story that when you are injured in your car, the ambulance will come and will know who you are. And this is science fiction, but there are values in having a connected car integrated with you as a human and your applications and your devices and your data and your content, which is the next thing that we are all looking for.
Two things. First of all, I must tell you that I had a disappointment with AEPs. Okay, when I first heard about Acceda, if somebody knows Acceda, but others, Eteros, ILST, and others, I said to myself, here is the solution. Okay, here is a platform that will create de facto standard, and based on this de facto standard, it will be easy to developers to build more applications. And we know that whatever propels the market is that the barrier for an application developer to get in is small. It doesn't need to deal with hardware, it doesn't need to deal with infrastructure, it doesn't need to deal with communications. And unfortunately, two things happen. The first one, there were too many of them, so you can't make 7,000 standards, although this is a situation today with standards. And the second, they are not strong enough really to develop, at least to offer today this easy environment. Okay guys, let's move to another area, and that's security. I mean, we heard today, at least part of us, a very, very interesting presentation about security that actually did its job as far as I'm concerned, because I came out of it totally frightened and decided not to drive a connected car and not to wear any wearables, etc. Although at the end, Yossi mentioned that there are solutions. Where do you think are the major points to be handled in the security systematically, and how do you foresee the evolution of the IoT in terms of the security needs and the security solutions that will come?
There's a very big topic, a couple of crisp observations from Intel. First of all, security can't be an afterthought. It has to be built into the design of the delivery of the end-to-end solution. And if you don't have security as you design your solutions, then trying to backfill that becomes very, very hard. People always ask me, why Intel procured McAfee and why that was a key focus for us. It was an understanding that security was going to be required in all of these end-to-end deployments, all the way through the Internet of Things. So I think that's the first point. I think the second thing is, as we see the convergence of IT and OT, so the classic enterprise solutions with the Internet of Things deployment, in the manufacturing floor, in the car, you're dealing with communities that have much less of an understanding of the role and need for security. I mean, I have some very basic dialogues with, for example, somebody developing a retail store of the future, and we ask, have you comprehended security in your design? And they say no. And we say, well, you should have been hearing that from your enterprise guys, and they say we don't talk to our enterprise guys. So I think it's also a making sure that enterprises and that whole business process is having a meaningful dialogue. And certainly my observation of the boardrooms of my region are there's not enough discussion across all parts of those businesses of the need for security and an understanding of the need for security across all of those elements. It's much stronger in the enterprise than in the other parts of the network.
So first of all, a question. When you mentioned solution, were you referring to the fact that the hacker was found dead in his hotel room? Or something else?
It's part of the solution.
Uh, so I'll represent a different point of view here.
we have a panel?
Yes. And claim that as long as most innovative solutions or end user applications, or a lot of them, will emerge out of small companies, otherwise known as startups. Security will be a feature that will be added after adoption and will not be something that's considered a design goal, just because that's how startups work. And if something spreads, it becomes a risk, and when it becomes a risk, you solve the risk, because otherwise you don't want to spend your resources on developing security for something that you don't even know if it will be adopted. So my prediction is that there will be a lot of applications that will be developed without any security, and by the way, without any privacy concerns. And over time, security will be tightened and privacy will somehow gel into something that people will be able to accept. It's probably not going to be true in areas that are highly regulated, like healthcare or transportation, but in many other areas, I think security will be an afterthought.
So security, according to me, would be the IoT aspect would be DNA, basically device, network, and application level security. And then if you go to a pure IoT environment where only devices are interoperating with each other, then you need something like a reputation bureau where you can actually blacklist devices which cause security issues. So in future, if you look at 5, 7, 10 years down, the future model would be that you would have companies like McAfee and Norton providing those paid subscribed services where your devices would know that it should not talk to these other devices.
Just to comment on your thought, I think that most of these small startups, if they have good solutions, will be acquired by big companies. They will embed them into their solutions, which will be part of their security design, because the big companies cannot allow themselves not to consider security. And another thing is that I want to follow your Yasser point. We all agree that the IoT is a device which also consists of a chip in the device, the application and the cloud. And the security has to be designed in these levels as well, with one of the main focuses, and Yossi mentioned it in his presentation today, is what or how quickly can we recover from an attack. Assuming that an attack will happen, how quickly can we recover from an attack? And the more complicated and sophisticated this IoT world will be, the attacks will be more sophisticated, and potentially also the recovery time will be longer. And that's what we need to focus on.
As a guy who is not a security expert, there is one thing that at least I didn't understand from your answers. Is the problems that we have today, and those are different answers, is that there isn't any awareness, but the technology and the solutions are there, or still the security world needs to do one step further and develop more solutions in order really to block the IoT environment?
Well, you are waving. So.
I have one comment. Security is a pain in the ass. You cannot monetize on security. Nobody will pay for a more secure car, right? So everybody is trying to get away with as minimum security as they potentially can. So you have to have recalls, you have to have Stuxnet, you have to have disasters to bring up the attention of